Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to Global Compliance Panel live webinar on Allergen Control. My name is Ron and I'm going to be your host for today's session. On behalf of the Global Compliance Panel team, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by Melinda Allen. A few words about Melinda before we could start off today's session. Melinda is a food safety and quality consultant in the food industry. Melinda has a long and dedicated career of quality assurance and food safety leadership with companies such as Yum Brands and Quiznos. Her consulting clients have included leaders in the field such as Burger King, Panda Express, and Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. She continues to work with many of these and additional clients. Melinda and her team of experienced professionals are available for quality assurance and food services auditing, specification and program development and training, product commercialization. We are honored to have Melinda with us to present today's webinar. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I'd like to inform you of the program outline for this training session. This webinar is for 60 minutes duration. First, Melinda will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that she will be covering, and she will then share with you her presentation. We would also like to inform all our attendees, once you're part of this teleconference, your phone lines will be placed on mute and would remain so until the Q&A window begins towards the end of the webinar. I also request all our attendees to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of your time will be allotted, during which your questions will be answered. Now, if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or teleconference, please follow the same procedure to join in again. And now that we're all ready to start, I request Melinda to take it from here. Melinda?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your attending the webinar today. Our topic, again, is allergen control. And so we will begin with reviewing the course outline. Today's topics are going to include NLEA legislative background and requirements. So we'll talk about what the laws are with respect to allergens here in the U.S. Then we'll cover the common allergens, which is the big 8, and why your companies are going to even be concerned about allergens, both from a consumer perspective as well as from a compliance perspective. Then we'll get into exactly how we go about controlling allergen cross-contamination through prerequisite programs, ingredient and packaging receiving, storage tracking, production scheduling, equipment and tool cleaning, as well as segregation. And then finally, we'll talk about verification of allergen cleaning and segregation through testing methods. At the end of the presentation, there's what I call a knowledge assessment. So it's a little quiz that you can take to be sure that you're familiar with all the requirements and the topics that we've covered. And then there is a attendance acknowledgement that you can fill out to keep on file in the event of audits or any type of customer interest, wherein they want to review the fact that your team has been made aware of allergen concerns. So starting with slide number 3, which is our introduction, the FDA estimates that in the U.S., approximately 2% of adults suffer from allergies. And that would go up to 5% when you get to infants and young children. And this results in approximately 30,000 emergency room treatments and up to 150 deaths. So the reason that we are interested in or focused on allergens in a production environment is due to the rising concerns with people who are suffering either greatly or mildly from allergens in food. The next slide shows exactly what an allergenic reaction is. So it's based on a physiological response that individuals have to either eating or being exposed to some type of a protein which they have a sensitivity to, and this causes their body to develop or to produce immunoglobulin E. We also call that IgE. The first time you're exposed to the allergen, you don't have a specific reaction. That's when the immunoglobulins are actually produced. It's the next time, once they're present, that you actually produce histamines, which are what you feel or what the allergenic person feels, allergic person feels as a response. So then on slide 5, we talk about the symptoms. So depending on where the histamine is produced, determines where or what type of a response or symptom that you have. So if it is a histamine that's produced in your ear, nose, and throat, you will have your itchy nose, mouth, or up to trouble breathing and swallowing. If it's produced in the skin, that results in a rash. And finally, if it's produced in your gastrointestinal tract, you have stomach pains, cramps, and diarrhea. So again, based on what type of or what location the histamines occur, you can have a different type of reaction to the same ingredient, but they tend to follow certain patterns for individuals as reported. So most people will have peanut allergies associated with the ear, nose, throat, and then the anaphylaxis. Some, you'll hear people say, they break out in a rash from being exposed to certain foods, especially shellfish. Some have an anaphylactic type of response wherein they have the closing of the mouth and throat. So it all depends on, again, where that histamine is produced. And the severity can vary from person to person as well. The severity also can change over time. So people become more and less sensitive to allergens, and some actually even disappear or what they call grow out of allergies. On the next slide, number 6, we're going to take a look at just how many recalls are generated by foods which are primarily mislabeled. Sometimes you will have actual production cost contamination, wherein a food is not supposed to contain an allergen by formulation, but has been contaminated again with that allergen. But primarily what we're finding is foods that are mislabeled in that their primary ingredients contain an allergen which they haven't declared on the label. So you see here, undeclared allergen forms about 80% of the allergen recalls. But if you look at the total pie, only salmonella has more recalls than undeclared allergens. I'm sorry, that was 34.9%, 80 total reports. Salmonella would be 37.6% of your reports, and then other bacterial contaminations making up the remainder, or the vast remainder. A little bit of foreign objects, approximately 1.3%. But as you can see, allergens, salmonella are by far the biggest issues out there, and which is why I'm glad that you guys have joined us today in order to review this information. So the Food and Drug Administration is also invested in trying to resolve and better our compliance with helping out customers who are allergic to various foods. If you look at the next slide on legislation, the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004, also known as FALCPA, was passed in, obviously, August 2nd of 2004. And it states that the common name of allergens must be labeled in bold or following the ingredient statement on all retail packaging. Restaurant and food service packaging, being back of house, is exempt. So it's exempt from the labeling laws. However, be aware that it is not exempt from freedom of information, so customers should be able to call or find that information somewhere if they're interested in understanding what allergens are in your product. The reason that there is no labeling required is obviously that the packaging isn't available to the consumer. Say, for instance, if you're at a retail store, a retail restaurant, and they're receiving food on a plate or in a decorative wrapping, they can't see the ingredient statement, so there's no onus on the supplier to actually print that there. But best practice is going to be for your company to print its ingredient statement and necessary allergen declarations on the secondary or outer packaging of ingredients supplied to a food service restaurant or even further processors, so that they can move forward with sharing that information with consumers. And that can be in a number of ways. If you look at slide number 8, again, this is a voluntary standard that retailers are providing provided information from their own customers. However, as of the passing of FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and its reliance on a HACCP-based system, you will need to have that information available for your further processors and customers in the form of restaurant chains or restaurant companies. The ways that that has been most successfully implemented in the United States has been websites, brochures, even customer call-in numbers, and education of the crew members who are providing or serving food. So let's get directly into the allergens that we're concerned about. Here in the United States, slide 9 will show you that we are 90% covered if we're taking care of the 8 or big 8 allergens, which are eggs, fish, milk, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, soy, and wheat. Next slide gives you an approximation of where these allergens fall in terms of population sensitivity. You can see that they're not all that different. There's no one that really jumps out as the primary offender. There's a pretty even spread, but you can see that those 8 are of our biggest concern. Again, the numbers don't total up to 100% because people are allergic to a lot of additional things. Could be any type of protein, but these numbers are the ones that are at the top of the list of all those various items. So moving on to slide number 11, based on product formulation, sampling in the marketplace, complaints from consumers, recalls are generated by the FDA. And you can see here, it just appears that milk, right behind that, peanuts, tree nuts, and sulfites are some of the biggest offenders. Sulfites are not actually an allergen. They're a sensitizer in the U.S. However, or a sensitivity, we also say. They are still heavily reported and can cause recalls if not declared properly. Again, there's a chart on page or slide 12, which shows how these items are distributed with respect to RFR, or the recall reports, and what types of items that they appear in. So again, dairy and bakery probably go together, and that there are a lot of inadvertent inclusions in bakery products with the multiple ingredients that go into the formulations, and dried milk, as we'll talk about later, is often mistaken in the various forms that it's declared. This just gives you an idea of what would be your highest risk ingredients as you're doing your HACCP ingredient analysis, what types of items that you should focus on, especially reviewing labels with suppliers and getting questionnaires to understand the potential exposures. So we counted down the 8 allergens and where they fall in terms of importance. So now let's talk about each one individually, starting with milk. And what I want to do here is kind of go through the types of products or ingredients that the items might be found in, such as, or what type of a nomenclature they may be declared on your ingredient labels in. So casein, whey, condensed, dry, evaporated, powdered milk. There's a very comprehensive list here that I hope that you will utilize in reviewing your labels. Milk from mammals other than cows can also be a concern, so keep that in mind. Then there's some names that may not jump out at not only consumers, but then our own team members that are reviewing labels and looking for allergens to complete their HACCP checks. Lactalbumin, lactalbumin phosphate are some of the terms that you'll want to have them have access to and be familiar with. Below that, some more common items: butter, cheese, sour cream, custard, fat, chocolate, half and half. All of these would probably more readily be picked up. Going on to slide 14, as the team is formulating ingredients, a lot of times we just choose to eliminate or substitute some of these items to remove that allergen and, again, create a product which is more favorable or more acceptable to the consumer. Some substitutes that are commonly used would be milk from other ruminants or goats. Keep in mind, though, people who have that sensitivity may also be sensitive to the milk from other animals. Then you also have the grain-based substitutes like soy, nut, hemp, rice, and oat milk. Almond milk is taking on a prominent place in the marketing industry. Silk used to be one of the #1 replacements, but there's lots of people joining kind of the marketplace now. Moving on to slide 15, next up would be peanuts. One of our, again, not only top recalls, but also most severe reaction or reactive allergens. So I know that everyone's heard the stories about people going into anaphylactic shock and carrying EpiPens, which is epinephrine, in order to avoid a reaction or a severe reaction up to death from exposure to peanuts. Sometimes you will see that ingredients might include artificial peanuts or artificial nuts. Keep in mind that even though it's artificial, that could still be a natural nut, but it's been flavored to simulate a different nut, and so shouldn't be taken to be free of nut protein. Common misconception deals with the oils from nuts. So it depends on how that oil has been processed or created as to whether or not you will be able to substitute that nut and that nut oil and call it allergen free. So if it's cold pressed, expelled, or extruded, some of what we call the gourmet oils, you will want not to use that as a non-allergenic oil because it will contain the protein and will be issues for people with allergens. Slide 17 talks about tree nuts, including mortadella, which is may contain pistachios, and even coconut has been on the bubble. As of 2006, it was declared an allergen. I've heard recent talk that it's been declared not an allergen. So if you have coconut in your ingredient statement, I would recommend that you declare it just so that you will be able to give the most information available to your consumer and let them make the decisions as to whether or not that's an issue for them. The next slide, number 18, contains a comprehensive list of all the tree nuts so that you can differentiate it from non-tree nuts. And I've also included the scientific name or genus species to be really clear because some of them may have different common names, not only in different communities but also different countries. Now, some common misconceptions for items which can be mistakenly thought of as nuts or have been in the past include items that just happen to have nuts in the name. They're not actually of that family of items or foods. Nutmeg is actually a spice. It's not a nut at all. Water chestnut is not a nut either. It's actually a plant or a root called a corm. So keep in mind those two things, even though they are called nut something or something nut, they're not actually any relationship to the nut family. Next up is fish. And I just want to remind you that surimi, which is crab or artificial crab, is not a fish, it's a shellfish. If it's surimi or the artificial version, it's fish, as opposed to crab, which is a shellfish. And if that's confusing, you have any questions after the seminar, please bring them up. But fish is pretty self-explanatory. Anything with the scale or that has a that does not have a shell, we consider a fish, versus the shellfish would be the crabs and the like. Common misconception ingredient is carrageenan, which is an allergen. And again, a whole different class family of organisms. Should be safe for people who have fish allergies. Has a lot of common names like Irish moss, again, algae and carrageenan. It's also a very common ingredient used as a stabilizer or bulk agent in our food stuff. So keep in mind that does not actually come from or relate to fish. Another one is iodine. That's slide 22. That's actually just another chemical that seems to be associated with fish that there's been some confusion as to whether or not it's an allergen associated with people who have fish allergies. And again, should not be. But there's a lot of commonality in allergens in that they tend to come in groups, and people who are allergic to one thing are often allergic to something similar and have multiple allergies. So again, their allergy to two things does not necessarily link the two things. And fish and iodine, you may be allergic to both, but that is not because the one is related to the other in any specific way. It could be a similar the biological response that you'll get. Our next item up is wheat, which is 523. And what we really want to point out here is not only is it an allergen, a very common allergen in children that tends to resolve itself with age, it's very different from gluten sensitivity that some people have and don't grow out of, called celiac disease. So we want to be sure that we are really clear on that. As you're reformulating on slide 24, there's a couple of alternatives that are commonly seen out there, like hammocks, and I'm not sure how you would pronounce that, but it's a pretty rare grain that's not seen very often unless you're into the whole foods and natural foods and substitutions. Spelt is another. Neither of these is the best alternative because, again, there's a vast amount of linkage or commonality, and people that tend to be allergic to one tend to be allergic to the other. So that covers all the allergens. We've gone through all 8. If any of these ingredients are in your product formulation, you'll need to declare these on the label, either of your primary packaging or your secondary packaging, also in your specifications to customers, and any other methods. Most customers will actually ask you for a survey because they will not only want to know if that ingredient is contained in the product, they'll want to know if that ingredient is processed on those lines so that they can, again, do a risk assessment of whether or not you need to or they need to test for and be aware of the possible presence of that allergen. The next slide is number 25, and it shows you what a retail allergen label needs to look like. And just want to be clear that if you're a restaurant or a processor who's not presenting a label to a consumer, you still have to be able to control those allergens as well as be aware and share that information with consumers. The allergen labeling laws require several things, one of which is that you have the common name available on the label. So those names that we call the allergen by at the heading of the presentation versus those names within the presentation where I'm listing out all of the sources and causes. Again, especially with milk, dairy, the reason that you are seeing so many allergen recalls is because, as you can see, there's so many different names for the dairy items that people are missing those in their ingredient surveys. If you are doing a retail product, then that label needs to contain the allergen called out specifically in the common name, but also in a very specific format. It can be bolded within the ingredient statement, or it can follow. And slide number 27 will show you that a best practice is to have a listing of all of your ingredients, finished products, and what allergens are present in them. This will not only help you with declaring or sharing that information with your consumer, it will help you later on as we talk about production scheduling, ingredient storage, and all those ways and things that we're going to cover that will create your allergen control program. So raw material allergen labeling is also really critical. And as you'll see on slide 28, you may have incoming ingredients that are necessarily single ingredients and don't appear to have allergens, but we still need to be aware of those items and label them properly. A good way to be sure that you have captured all the allergens that are in your formulation is to request a certificate of analysis from your ingredient suppliers, and you may be asked to present these to your customers as well from your own production. On slide 29, I'm just showing you an example there of what that might look like, just having that testing result from the lab or your internal testing facility to present. And I already mentioned the raw material allergen labeling, and that single ingredient foods must also comply. So if you find yourself in that category where you produce, for instance, tomatoes or fish, you still need to be sure that that's a common name is available so that anyone purchasing the product can identify the allergens very easily. Slide 31 just gives you kind of a picture of a couple of these items, wherein the name is quite evident of what the item contains and whether or not there's an allergen. So let's get into storage of these ingredients once you bring them into your processing facility or your restaurant or whatever food venue that you are responsible for. On slide 32, you'll see that you want to segregate them and what I call horizontally, such that any raw ingredient with an allergen can never be stored above an ingredient which does not contain the same allergen. If you have employed a sufficient amount of raw material packaging, you may be able to gain exemption, but it's just really a very difficult and what would be considered by auditors or anyone who's doing a risk assessment in your facility is a risky practice to do otherwise than horizontal segregation. A lot of organizations will utilize a vertical storage and labeling. So segregating those items by identifying exactly where in the warehouse you can put different types of allergens. So redundant barriers, in addition to location segregation, is a good method of keeping allergens separate in storage. Redundant barriers being you have an inner pack, you have an outer pack. Therefore, if you have some type of damage to your outer pack, you may not necessarily need to take immediate action or be concerned about contamination until you get to damage of the inner pack. Next up is slide 34 with production scheduling. So I mentioned you're having a grid which lists all of your ingredients as well as your finished products, what allergens they contain. And the point being, whenever you're running an item that has an allergen in it, if you switch to an item that does not have that allergen, you'll need to do a full cleanup and remove any traces of allergens from the area, such that any new production doesn't contact that allergen and create cross-contamination of your formula. Slide 35 talks about then how you verify that that process or program has been effective through swabbing And we will talk about the different methods that are available currently for testing for allergens as we go through this presentation. So we talked about storage, we've talked about scheduling, because as we go into processing on slide 36, a best recommendation is to batch allergens in separate areas if possible. That would be your most reliable method of segregation, but if you can't, at least separating by time so that you're not batching allergens in the same room at the same time, because airborne particulate can also be a problem. As you know, the testing is going to go to parts per million, and you may be able to pick up traces that a consumer may or may not be able to or may not be sensitive to with the testing that's available in the testing community these days. And also it's recommended that you color code and label any utensils that you use or equipment that you use so that you can verify that the segregation is happening from tool to tool. On slide 37, we want to continue on to talk about, again, labeling. So every point in the process that allergens are involved, you will need to identify that they're in the process such that either employees, tools, equipment won't be a source of cross-contamination. People will be aware that that allergen is in process or in the area. Maintaining a spatial barrier between each allergen and non-allergen is also what we described as the horizontal segregation. So not only in storage, but also in what would that be called, in processing, in the processing area. Next item would be cleaning. Slide 38, I want to talk a little bit about after we have brought these allergens into the processing area, the critical thing is to remove them before we then run a product that does not have that allergen. So if you will take a look at slide 38, you've got a summary there about protein. The protein is the allergenic part of the ingredient, so you want to be sure that you have removed that, and it just so happens that protein is also the most difficult substrate to clean. So depending on the complexity of the protein, it'll be more or less difficult to remove. You want to be sure that your cleaning, not only equipment, but also cleaning chemicals are sufficient and appropriate to the activity. I must caution you not to rely on heat treatment, as in with your, say for instance, bakeries or oven processes where you may be able to flash off or kill bacteria. Again, the sensitivity of individuals to the proteins and allergens is not affected necessarily by heat. Some proteins are denatured sufficiently that individuals are not affected by them, but that can't always be guaranteed. And the same with some of the testing methodologies are able to pick up that denatured protein, so you don't want to have those residues remaining either on your equipment to be transferred into food and cause yourself a recall. Alkaline cleaners with hypochlorite wetting agent are commonly used in the industry for removal of protein. So keeping that in mind, and be sure not to expect that a sanitation or a sanitizer step is going to affect your protein level, because the protein will have an adhesive quality to it, to the equipment, And therefore, even though you can sanitize or kill all the bacteria, which is all sanitizers do, you may still have a residual protein which will test out and affect your allergenic consumers. Slide 41 goes on further to talk about the physical cleaning, making sure that you're looking at joints, pits, cracks, or allergenic individuals from being affected by the protein, nor does it prevent testing methods from picking up protein. So you won't want to rely on heat treatment as part of your protein removal or cleaning process for allergens. Furthermore, use of alkaline cleaners with a hypochlorite wetting agent is your best method of removal usually, but you'll want to consult with your sanitation or cleaning company and provider of chemicals for the best products for your particular substrate, because as I mentioned, the complexity of the protein itself can have an effect on how strong a cleaner that you'll need to remove it. And again, 100% removal is absolutely required. When you're validating your cleaning program with respect to allergens, a lot of times we're able to rely on the visual removal. However, you want to validate that through testing as well with some type of a swab and calibration of those individuals doing the visual inspection, looking in the nooks and crannies and the dead ends and the gaps and joints, et cetera, of your equipment. Finally, sanitizers are not, and I repeat, sanitizers are not a part of that program. They don't remove protein. They only kill the bacteria that's present that they can, that they contact. So if you have buildup or any type of residue or remaining product on your equipment, sanitizers will be effective at killing the bacteria on the surface such that your swab won't pick up ATP, et cetera. Keep in mind you could still have protein present that will be picked up by your swabs for allergens. So we talked about slide 41 in terms of pits, cracks, and surfaces and any type of gaps and joints and junctures, as well as slide 42, verification testing. You'll want to do this on a regular basis as well, just to keep abreast of how your program is performing, whether or not you're getting a full removal of the protein. Be sure to get into the cracks and crannies, looking for any residues there. The next aspect on slide 43 is going to be the GMPs that you're performing are also a part of your allergen control program, because as you control the garments of your employees which come into contact with your product contact surfaces, as well as the hands of the employees who are working with your allergens, you will be maintaining or controlling your allergens in that respect. Hand washing specifically, especially after lunch, because it's very difficult to control and not really advisable to try to control what people bring in their lunches or eat in their lunches, and they most likely will have one of those big 8 allergens. So then let's talk about testing. So there's 3 types or 3 classifications of testing. One is the ELISA test, which is an acronym for enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. And this locates antibodies for allergenic proteins. So as we described at the beginning of the presentation, how the physiology of an allergy, this test simulates that same reaction but on a chemical level. So again, it's the most, what would you call, accurate in terms of physiological response. However, you move on to the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, which is the most accurate test. It, however, goes above and beyond what you may be able to, or what an individual would be able to sense, because here you're looking for the actual DNA molecules of the allergenic protein. And remember, we talked about the heat treatment and how protein can be denatured. So then the chains are broken, but that's the same response, or the same reaction that is happening in the test. So it's designed to pick up those broken proteins. So while they may be denatured and may not be have an effect on the allergenic individual, they will still be picked up by this test. And then finally, we've got the rapid test kit, where you can use a solution which will give you a quick response about the presence of proteins using one of these methodologies or a combination of different chemical reactions. These are probably more likely a local verification. You'll want to take your actual validation study to a lab and get either an ELISA or a PCR test. Slide 45 shows you what that would look like in graphic format. So an ELISA test is where you're adding a sample, it's reacting with the substrate, and then you wash the sample away and you look and get your results. Just wanted you to kind of have a chance to see what that might look like. PCR test kits are usually a combination of viral chemicals which enumerate the DNA, and then you're able to, again, quantify what amount of DNA is still present in whatever the samples that you tested. Oh, then somehow we got a blank slide on 47. You want to move to 48, which is one of our rapid test kits, and you can see how they've boiled all that down to a very simple go, no-go type of a reading, allowing you to get instant results. So we have gone through the entire program. We've talked about allergens, how people are affected. We've talked about what the allergens specifically are. Slide 49 is our summary. Milk, soy, wheat, fish, shellfish, peanuts, and eggs. You'll want to be very familiar with those, as well as all the different names that they can be identified by. And once you have identified what your allergens are, it's very critical that you have a program in place to control allergens both in receiving, storage, processing. You need to have a program that will allow you to be able to clean after you run a product with an allergen, and then verify that that cleaning has been effective. And that, my friends, concludes our webinar. I want to, again, call your attention to the knowledge assessment that's there for your use, as well as the attendance acknowledgement. Following those two slides is number 52, which has all the references and material, which goes into greater depth. If you want to research further or have more, need more in-depth knowledge about any of the topics. And next, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Ron so that he can facilitate the question and answer session.
Thank you, Melinda, for the presentation. And I would also like to thank all participants in particular, though we had a lot of interruptions in the middle of the session. Thank you so much with us to cooperating with us. And ladies and gentlemen, now this is the Q&A session. So I request all who have questions for our presenter to click on the raise hand option, which is a palm-like icon at the bottom of your participants panel. Now this is to ask your questions verbally, or you can post in your questions in the Q&A panel so that our presenter can read it out loud and then answer it for you. or if for any reason you're unable to ask your questions using either of two means that I just mentioned, you can share your question with me through chat, and I shall pass it on to our presenter and we'll get that answered for you. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, as we're waiting for the Q&A, for the questions to come up, I sincerely request you to share your feedback in the feedback form that has appeared on your polling panel right now. As you can see, the feedback is just 8 questions, mostly multiple choice in nature, and it wouldn't take more than 2 minutes of your time to answer it. This polling would remain open till the end of the session, so you can answer it even after the Q&A is over. We will be grateful if you could stay back a little longer and complete this feedback for us. Okay, Melinda, I do have one of the attendees who are waiting to ask a question. I'm going to unmute their line, and they will ask you a question verbally. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Amy.
Just a question on oils and highly refined oils. If we're using a highly refined soybean oil or a highly refined peanut oil, does the allergen transfer, or those highly refined oils seem very differently than the cold pressed oils?
Highly refined oils, while they would appear in your ingredient statement, they do not need to appear in the allergen call out at the end, because those, again, the protein is not present, and therefore there should not be an allergic reaction by the individual.
Okay, can I tag another oil question? So obviously we have fryers that we fry multiple items that would contain many of the big 8 allergens, but in your presentation you talk about our ability to be able to talk with our consumer about our allergens. Today our current stance is that anything that passes through our fryer, we do not tell the guest it's an option for them if they have any of the big 8 allergens. Where is the stance on allergens transferring? So say I drop shrimp in the fryer and then I'm serving French fries and I have a guest who's allergic to shrimp. Can they eat French fries?
No.
Okay, that's our current stance. I just wanted to make sure. So there is concern about allergen transfer in the fryer. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. I think that answers my questions regarding oil.
Okay. Yeah, if you'd like to expound on that, as far as the fryers, again, we talked about the heating of the protein and the transfer of the protein material, such that even if your consumer is not affected by that denatured protein, it may be picked up again by a test kit or a testing, either through your own in-house testing or regulatory monitoring. So the best thing to do in all cases, again, and I can't say enough, and I just did a webinar on the same, is verification and validation. So test, test, test. So run some tests on those fries and see if you pick up those proteins following frying with shrimp. However,
how accurate?
Go ahead.
How accurate are the rapid test kits?
Less accurate than the lab, the PCR and ELISA. However, you can probably run more tests because you can get more responses, and it's a lot less expensive.
Okay.
So you can get more data. So you choose either one, but I would just recommend that you do verify that for yourself, because the amount of protein, depending on the formulation of your product, the amount of protein and as well as the turnover of oil in your fryer. So the amount of protein that you're imparting may not be significant enough. It may be so trace that you would never actually achieve a transfer. But again, it's so possible. You need to validate that that's in fact the case.
Okay. And thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Melinda?
Yes.
I have a question. We have a two ingredients that we use in a finished good, and one is a barley grass and the other is a wheat grass. And we've gone back and forth and seen, I guess, logic on both sides of whether or not to declare those as allergens. What is the stance on a barley grass and a wheat grass?
Wheatgrass, definitely, because that's wheat. And so wheat is an allergen, barley is not. However, those individuals, you want to make sure that that barley is clearly communicated in your ingredient statement, because people with celiac disease can be affected by different types of gluten, and therefore barley may be a problem for them. But that's totally separate from the big 8 allergens that we're talking about. So on another topic, yes, that's important. No, it's not part of the big 8 allergen call-out and the FALSA, the Food Allergen Labeling Consumer Protection Act. But in terms of, you know, making your consumers able to get as much information as they need to protect their health, you just want to make sure that barley is definitely present in your ingredient statement. For those people who have those sensitivities, read labels very intensively. But no, it's not something that's going to be picked up, called out, or create a recall, because barley is not an allergen.
Okay.
Wheat is.
But we had seen something where there was, like, because it was a wheat grass, that it wasn't considered part of the top 8 or the big 8.
Wheat grass?
I've
never seen anything like that.
No.
Because
Okay.
wheat grass would contain, wheat. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you find any further research or would like me to do some, please contact me, because I've not seen that as an exemption.
Okay. I'll see what we can find from our research and see if I can forward that to you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Melinda. Amy, I think you have another question. Go ahead with your question.
I'm good, Ron.
Great then, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, just a piece of information. If in case you do come up with any question even after today's session, you can go ahead and send in your questions to me, and I can go ahead and pass it on to Melinda, and we'll get that answered for you. And also like to inform all our attendees that if in case you feel that your team members, colleagues, friends might benefit from this webinar, we're happy to inform you that it will be available in the recorded format, so you can purchase it from our website or you can call our toll-free number. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the Q&A session is on, and we do have about another 2 to 3 minutes left. So if you do have any questions, request you to go ahead and click on the raise hand option, which is on your panelist column, or you can simply go ahead and send me a chat messenger. I will pass on your question to Melinda, and Melinda will answer it for you. And just a gentle reminder, ladies and gentlemen, request you all to go ahead and fill in the feedback, your thoughts about the training session. Your feedback is very important for us to go ahead and improve our webinars, and it is also a vital piece of information to our speakers. So request you all to go ahead and fill in the feedback form before you could log off today's session. And this is the upcoming webinars from Melinda Allen. Now, if you do need more information about the webinars, request you to go ahead and log into our website, and you'll have more information about the areas covered in each particular topic, which is listed on the screens right now. Okay, Amy, I'm sorry, Melinda, I don't see any question that's coming up from our participants. Now, we'll give it about a final 30 seconds and see if we have any questions. If not, we will conclude today's session, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Ron, are you still there? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
I was just going to ask if we would be able to print a copy of the screens that were used in the presentation today.
Sure. Marty, I had sent in all the information last evening to all the attendees.
Okay.
However, what I would do now is I will go ahead and resend the slides to you once we finish with our training session. I also request you to check your spam or your junk folder to find it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know again, if you do come up with any questions, even after today's session, as I mentioned to you earlier, please go ahead and send in your questions to me, and I will pass it on to our presenter, and we'll get that answered for you. Okay, Melinda, I don't see any question that's coming up from our participants. Do you have any final thoughts before we could conclude today's session?
I'm good. I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate everyone attending and hope that it was a valuable session, and encourage you to incorporate this information in your program, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Melinda. Ladies and gentlemen, I again apologize for the interruptions that we had during the session. We welcome your suggestions, your feedbacks, or ideas on how we can improve our webinars. We look forward to having you with us again sometime soon. On behalf of our presenter, Melinda Allen, and the entire Global Compliance Panel team, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this event, and I wish you all a pleasant day ahead. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Melinda, thanks again for the session today. Have a good day ahead.
Thank you all. You too. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.